Now that we've covered the basics of creating documents from Adobe InDesign, we can understand how to set the program up to work the way that we'd like it. This chapter of our Total Training InDesign CS6 Essentials course deals with setting up Adobe InDesign to best suit our needs. While the lessons here are not the most exciting, understanding how InDesign's preferences work and how to make those preferences work for us is crucial to getting the most out of this powerful page design program. Whether you've come to this point in the InDesign CS6 course by following faithfully all of our exercises and units sequentially, or you've just popped into this because you want to learn a little bit more about how to set up InDesign CS6 to work the way you'd like to do it, the best way that you can do that is to set the preferences for the program before you start working with any InDesign documents. In this case, because we're working on the Windows PC platform, we do that by going to the Edit pull-down menu and going to the command all the way down at the bottom of that menu and select the Preferences menu command. If you're working on the Macintosh platform, the way you'd do that is you'd go to your InDesign pull-down menu or your Application pull-down menu, and again select that Preferences command. And when you do that, it'll show this submenu that shows all of the settings that we can modify to work the way we'd like them to work within the Preferences dialog box. You'll notice only one of them, the one at the very top, has the keyboard shortcut, which is Control-K on the Windows platform or Command-K if you're working on the Mac. I'm going to click on that menu command, and what it'll do is it'll actually bring up our Preferences dialog box. At the very top of that General section, that's the very first one that shows right over here, we have the Page Numbering options box. And right here we basically have two options. We can set section numbering, which allows us essentially to reset page numbering within an individual InDesign document. Say, using lowercase Roman numerals for the forward section of a book manuscript where the table of contents and the dedication and forward statements that you'd like to make would be included, and then reset that page numbering into Arabic numerals for the actual pages of your book manuscript. The other option we have is for absolute numbering, and in this case what it would do is it would only allow you to use one page numbering model and one page numbering sequence within individual InDesign document files. We're going to set the section numbering default because that gives us the most flexibility to work with. Beneath that, we have the font downloading and embedding section. And over here we have an edit box that is set by default to always subset fonts with glyph counts greater than 2,000 characters. What that essentially means is that for Western and Cyrillic fonts that you use inside your InDesign documents, it's actually going to contain the entire font character set when you create an Adobe Acrobat PDF file directly from InDesign. If I reduce this number from the default of 2,000, say, to 1, what that would do is that would subset any font that I use in my InDesign document files to show only the characters that are actually used inside that file. Now, two things happen when I do that. One of them is that it'll reduce the file size of the PDF file that I create, either a lot or a little, depending on how many fonts are included in that InDesign document file. So let's go back to that example I was talking about a bit ago where I was using a book manuscript that I'd be setting up in InDesign. In that case, I'd only be using one font family and probably 4 or 5 individual fonts. Reducing or subsetting the characters for each of those fonts that are included in that PDF file is not going to reduce that file size very much. If you were, say, building a magazine or a newspaper that contains advertising, though, subsetting those fonts may be significant because every ad probably has different fonts in it, advertisers generally work hard to make sure that their ads look different than anybody else's ads in the publication. If you're looking at tabloid newspaper pages or broadsheet newspaper pages where there might be 20 different fonts for each individual page, subsetting that might be really significant. So that's the first thing that could be affected by this font downloading and embedding option that we've set up right here. The other thing that's affected, though, is editing of that Acrobat PDF file. If you don't include all of the characters inside that individual font, you can't edit that PDF file, because the moment you click into any text there, what it's going to do is it's automatically going to blow out that font because the entire font character set isn't included. To give ourselves maximum flexibility as we're working with our exercises in our InDesign course, I'm going to bring that back to 2000, or the default setting. Beneath this, we have options for object editing. The first one is a checkbox that allows me to prevent selection of locked objects. I can lock objects or elements that I place inside an InDesign document file. That basically keeps me from accidentally bumping or altering those elements inside my InDesign document. If I turn that off, it would allow me to select those elements even if I had specified that they were locked. In our case right here, again, we'll go back to the default. When scaling, we have two options in these radio buttons that are shown right over here. Apply to content. That would be like the exercise we had done in the first chapter of our InDesign class, where we took our text and we blew it up to 150% by clicking on the text frame and using the scaling options that we had available to us in our control panel. If you'll remember, when we did that, not only did we make the text frame itself 150% of its previous size, we also increased the font size, the content inside that frame, from 12 points to 18 points. Turning off that option and clicking on Adjust Scaling Percentage basically allows me to adjust the frame independently to the content inside. We probably don't want to do that as a rule, because not only does that apply to content option work with text, just like we've talked about, but when we're scaling things like Illustrator EPS files or PDF graphics, what it also does is it allows us to scale stroke widths and other element attributes that are included in that placed graphic file. So applying to content is probably the right option to use as a matter of course. And then finally, I've got a button here that allows me to reset all my warning dialogues, in this case bringing myself back to the baseline. Let's go to the second category that we have available in our Preferences dialog box, and that's working with the interface, or how the application itself works when we're working with it. The first option we have here under our Cursor and Gesture Options section in this panel is to set tooltips to show fast, to show normally, or to show none at all. I'm going to go back to the fast setting, and I'm going to take my cursor and I'm going to place it on the direct selection arrow in my tool panel. What that does, it shows that little tooltip just to the right of there for a little bit that said, this is my direct selection arrow, and the keyboard shortcut, the letter A. It flashed up quickly and then it disappeared. I have the options to say no, don't show that at all, or normal, which would basically allow that to show up all the time we're working with it. As we're going through our InDesign course, we're going to select fast because it's going to give us those quick cues whenever we're working with individual tools or spots that we can deal with inside the interface. You may choose, as you get more familiar with the program, to use different options. Let's go through the checkboxes that are immediately below. Show thumbnails on place allows, when I get the place gun after grabbing something from that place dialog box, to give me a little cue that shows what type of element I've picked up in my place gun to place in my InDesign document. A little page if I'm working with a text file, or indications that I'm working with pictures and pixel files, or vector illustrations when I'm placing EPS files or vector PDF graphics. Show transformation values. That basically was that little gray box that worked with my cursor as I was dragging elements around on the screen and lining things up with the smart guides, or when I'm scaling by hand as opposed to working with the control panel, it allows me to see what's happening when I'm scaling or I'm changing the size of elements within my InDesign document. Enable multi-touch gestures basically works with touchpad options that we're working with, whether they're included in the laptop on my Mac or my PC platform and multi-touch gestures are available, or if I've attached an independent touchpad instead of working with a mouse. Turning that off would not allow me to use like the pinch and zoom options, for example, to scale the page that I was looking at within the document. Highlight object under the selection tool basically lets me know when I've got my cursor over an individual object that would be the object that's selected when I click the mouse button. Turning off that option wouldn't give me that little highlighter, that little cue that would let me know this is what's going to be selected immediately underneath my cursor. Let's go to the second section here, or our panel section. And here what we have are options for setting up a floating tools panel. Now by default, the tools panel is nested over here to the left side of my application window as I'm working within the Windows PC platform, or locked to the far left edge if I'm working on the Mac platform. The floating tools panel allows me to select single column, just like I've got right here, double column, which would essentially be the same thing as clicking those two little right pointing triangles at the top of the tools panel that we demonstrated when we were working in the first chapter of our InDesign course. You'll notice it flashes when I click on that because those options aren't available when I've got my dialog boxes up like I have right here. Or the third option, which is single row. I'm going to select that and say OK. And when I do that, what it does is it sets up a floating tool panel that I can take and I can bring across just like so to give myself a little bit room when I'm working with my InDesign documents. I don't actually want that option. I'm going to go back to my single column option, and in fact I'm going to grab that and bring it back to nested all the way over to the far side of my application window. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control K since I'm working on a Windows platform. It would be Command K if I was working on the Mac, and I'm going to return to that interface section of the Preferences dialog box. I also have the ability to auto-collapse icon panels. The auto-collapse icon panels option basically tells InDesign, if I have that selected, when I open up one of these icon panels, to automatically collapse back into the side dock or to collapse into just a button view when I'm working with that element and I click away from working within that individual icon panel. I don't set that as a rule because I figure if I have that open, I want to keep that open and may come back to it again. So what we're going to do in this case is we're actually going to go back here and we're going to go back to the default setting and turn that off so that when I open an icon panel, it stays open until I choose to close it. Auto show hidden panels. Basically, that allows me to take those and bring that in back and forth. Open documents as tabs. That allows me to open multiple InDesign document files and be able to select in between them with tabs like we've been working with through our InDesign course so far. Turning that off basically allows me to create a separate document window for each document file that I have open within the InDesign CS6 interface. We'll leave that default on there too. And then finally, enable floating document window docking. So in this case, what that means is that it would allow me to take floating documents. And I could take that and put that into that gray bar at the very top of a floating document window box. And when I put two of them together, it would switch from two separate document windows and bring them back to just one, but show tabs that I could use to select back and forth between them. Now, underneath here, we've got the hand tool. Basically, that's used for scaling and moving around on our page, much like we normally do working with our scroll bars. We can set that for higher quality or better performance, basically give me an indication of what we're working with. Live screen drawing. This is basically when we're resizing or we're rescaling elements, views, when we're working with InDesign documents. We can set that to be a little delayed, which means that it'll have a little bit of a flash when I get done with working where I've got from one view to another or moving an element from one spot to the next. Immediate, which shows that happening in real time, but slows down the redraw just a little bit, or never, where it would never do that, just simply go from one spot and into the next. Again, we'll leave that default setting right where it is. And then finally, Greek vector graphics on drag. What that would do, if I had that selected, would be if I selected a graphic element, say a pixel image or a vector graphic like an EPS file that I placed in an InDesign document, when I held the mouse button down and I decided to move it to another position, or I grabbed one of the anchor points and used that to resize either the frame itself or the content inside, it'd simply show as a gray box. You wouldn't actually see the live content when we were applying that movement or that transformation. We'll leave that option off, going with the default setting, because that way we can see what we're working with as we're dealing with elements in our InDesign document files.